Very good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruud Kempenaar. I'm a team leader working on industrial decarbonization in the Directorate General for Energy of the European Commission. For those who don't know what the European Commission is, the European Commission essentially develops policies in the area of energy in particular, but also any other fields, and those policies are for the EU as a whole. So one of the elements that we've been working on is also biomethane. Biomethane to help decarbonize the European economy. So where does biomethane fit in the whole realm of EU energy policy? The European policy really looks at how can we decarbonize a full sector. And what we've done for that is create an energy system integration strategy, which essentially has 3 pillars. The first pillar at the bottom is to really push energy efficient systems and circularity within the EU economy. Then secondly, we also look at deep electrification. Why is that? Yearly around 70 gigawatts already of new solar and wind are coming into the European energy system, which can really be helped to decarbonize, especially those end-use sectors that are still relying on fossil fuels, such as the industry, the transport sector, but also the heating of our houses. Then third, on top of it, we have also an important sector where electrification doesn't work. A lot of this is currently supplied with biomass. Actually, 60% of all the renewable energy used in Europe is biomass. Now, biogas is a sub-part of the biomass that we use, but it's very interesting. It's very interesting because Europe really relies on a lot of import of natural gas. And of course, the homegrown production of biogas and the upgrading of that biogas into methane can really help us reduce energy security aspects, as well as decarbonizing the economy, while providing economic benefits for those farmers, those rural communities that are developing the biogas and upgrading it into the biomethane. Secondly, as you see, previously our energy system was very linear. We imported oil, it went to the transport sector. We imported coal, it went to the electricity sector. We imported gas, it went into the building sector. What we're moving towards is a much more integrated system. And their infrastructure is going to be really, really important. And that also means that we have to, for example, create opportunities for biogas, which is currently used for heating, to also use in the industry sector, to also be used in the transport sector. I'll talk about that a little bit more. So what does biogas look like today? So as you see, the bioenergy mix that we use today, which is 60% of our renewables within the EU, the majority is solid biomass that we use, for example, for the production of electricity and heat. And only 11% of all the biomass is actually biogas, mostly produced with agricultural waste through anaerobic digestion. Now at the bottom here, you see where this goes to. So most of the biogas, and actually Germany, the country where we are today, is the biggest biogas producer in Europe, but most of that biogas is used locally. However, if we start upgrading that biogas into biomethane, CH4, we can start using our infrastructure, the 2 million kilometers of gas pipelines that we have within the EU, to bring that biomethane also to industry, the transport, or any other sectors for which this biomethane can be very useful. Biogas has already been supported through the EU legislation since 2009. And as you see, kind of the biogas has grown from about 5.5 million tons of oil equivalent to 15. So that's the equivalent about 18 BCM in gas terms, what we are producing today. Now, if we look into the future, and that's a chart on the left-hand side, you see that today we are still relying about 300 which is MTOE, so say 300 BCM of natural gas consumption within the EU. That's the blue bar on the left-hand side. Now, this is one of the scenarios, but there are many more scenarios that we're developing, but all the scenarios have something very similar. The share of natural gas will rapidly decline in any of our scenarios. So that means that we have to replace some of those molecules where we can't use electrons. We are going to do this with hydrogen. That's the discussion that we had the session before. But we also want to do this with biogas. And as you can see, that's the orange. Biogas in our scenarios is going to play a major role in decarbonizing a lot of the end-use sectors. Now, in 2022, Europe faced an energy crisis because Russia invaded Ukraine and also started to manipulate our gas markets. So at the beginning of that year, we put up a new strategy which we called RePowerEU. The main purpose of that strategy was to get rid of the reliance on the imports of Russian natural gas within the EU. And one of the tools to do so was to rapidly scale up the production of biomethane. Biomethane can be used directly one-to-one to replace the imported natural gas. So we put forward a proposal to increase the production of biomethane and biogas to 35 BCM, up from the 18 BCM that we have today. We are trying to achieve those targets through a number of methods, which I'll introduce to you later. But I think it's important here to highlight that even though energy prices have come down within the EU, there's still an important risk that we are still relying on quite some natural gas imports from Russia. To give you an example, last year we still imported around 40 BCM. So if we increase this to 35 BCM, again, this is a very important element to also increase the energy security and, of course, therefore, the economic environment for the European industry. So what we're doing in the RePowerEU scenario is to put forward those targets, but also start working with member states to make that scale up happen. Every single member state within the EU has to develop by July this year what is called the National Energy and Climate Plan. And in those National Energy and Climate Plans, they have to tell us how much biomethane they expect is going to be produced within that country and how are they going to scale that up. Now, we already received some drafts of those plans, and here we already see in the drafts, so the early plans without the discussions, that we're already moving towards around 30 BCM. So we're still having these discussions to see how we can increase this further. Besides that, we're also working with kind of the infrastructure developers to ensure that we have the access of biomethane to the grid, which was previously not the case, as well as to kind of scale up the production of biomethane facilities and, of course, the associated investments that are needed for that. Our estimate is that we think that about 30 billion euros is needed to meet these targets. The first element that we started to work on in this RePowerEU plan is to really kind of provide incentives for the biogas upgrading of biomethane. This requires additional investments on top of the biogas, and what we're doing here with the regulatory framework is to make it attractive for people to invest in this upgrading. One particular way of how we've done this is that we set targets for every single EU member state to have a certain percentage of their fuels delivered to the transport sector to be of renewable nature. Now, biomethane injected into the grid is allowed to be counted towards those obligations. So that gives a very clear incentive for investors to come in and help to upgrade the biogas and enter it into the gas grid. A second very important element is that a lot of the biogas currently is used locally. As you saw, 80% of it is used for the production of heat. But we also see important applications for biomethane to replace natural gas consumption in industry, for example, which is still reliant on those imports. But in order to do so, of course, that biomethane needs to be able to get to the end consumer. So one of the elements that we're doing is to work together with local authorities to do a much better regional assessment of how much biogas is available and how should we develop the networks, or how can we adjust the networks such that we can tap into these biogas opportunities. Another very important element is gas quality assessment standards. So if you introduce biomethane into a gas infrastructure, there are certain standards that you need to adhere to in order to, of course, ensure that we can kind of flow gas all the way through Europe. And there, together with the industry, we're developing those quality standards such that it enables the integration of that biomethane into infrastructure. Then, of course, we're looking also with industry at specific regulatory challenges or bottlenecks and how we can kind of alleviate those. Another important element is research and development and innovation gaps that are still there in the biomethane space. One of them is that in order to increase kind of the or invest in biomethane facilities, we also need to scale up the biogas production. So the scale up of both the technologies is one of the elements that we try to address with research and innovation. Secondly, biomethane production is currently still more expensive than the imports of natural gas. So here we're also looking at technology, supporting technology development to lower the costs, increase the cost competitiveness of biomethane production. The third one is indeed to help support the first element about integration. So how can we best kind of connect biomethane upgrade facilities to our infrastructure and the associated technologies that are needed for that. And then, of course, we need to also look at the supply. So the supply of biomass in order to create the biogas. Here, for example, the industry is really looking at what we call intermediate crops. So using agricultural land for the production of agricultural products, but then in the meantime, create intermediate crops that then can be used as a source for the production of biogas for, through anaerobic digestion. So again, that's a very important field where through research and innovation, we're trying to improve the efficiency of that biomass for the production of biomethane. Another very important element is, of course, those 37 billions of upfront investments that we need. How do we enable the industry to make that happen? And here we have a number of instruments at EU level that already are allowed to be used for the production of biogas or for the upgrading of biogas into biomethane. One of those important funds, and these are actually quite big funds, those are the funds that we use for rural development. Because from our perspective, producing biogas locally, producing biomethane locally, and then using that biomethane locally has a lot of additional economic benefits for rural communities. So instead of paying 50 billion euros to natural gas suppliers from outside of the EU, why don't we invest all of that financing in rural economies and rural regions within the EU? Another very important one is cohesion policy. Cohesion policy is a fancy word for the EU budget that is being used to do regional development. So every member state is subdivided into regions, and those regions have access to funds. And again, there, biogas is being recognized in those funds as eligible to be used for public financing. And then there are a number of funds, the Innovation Fund, but also Horizon Europe, which really look at research and innovation projects into kind of increasing, for example, the cost competitiveness of biomethane upgrading. Number one and number two are mostly grants. But number three, of course, and the EIB has been on our stand as well, and we have people around, they're also looking at, for example, guarantees, loans, etc., in order to help kind of meet that target of the 35 BCM. So where do we stand today? So as I mentioned before, we're working now with the member states to kind of have biogas in each and one of those national energy and climate plans. And today they amount up to 30 to 32 billion cubic meter of biogas. So in July, what we're hoping for is to see some of those potentials to be upgraded, some of those member states to become more ambitious, such that we meet the 35 BCM target that we set early in 2022. The second one is that the regulation has changed. So in between 2022 and today, we have a number of pieces of regulation that are very important to support the development of biomethane. One of them, for example, is that the EU as a whole has to do supply adequacy outlooks. Essentially, we have to look at energy security, and there biomethane has to be taken into account for those adequacy outlooks. But we're also looking at common specifications that now will be made for biomethane integration into existing grids. So irrespectively if you're in Croatia, in Greece, in Sweden, or in Ireland, there will be common specifications making it much easier for project developers to duplicate projects across the EU as a whole. Remember the 35 billion euros that we need in investments. We're already seeing that 18 billion euros of that has been mobilized in the last couple of years. Now, one important element that we're working there is permitting. On average, permitting within the EU still takes 4 years. So even though investments are being mobilized today, through the permitting process, it will take up till 2026, 2027 before those projects see the day of light. So there again, we're working with member states to see how we can really speed up all of those permitting processes to get that biomethane earlier onto the grid and help us reduce our energy dependence and increase the decarbonization. And then last but not least, it's the biomethane industrial partnership itself. So in 2022, we established alongside the strategy this biomethane industrial partnership. This biomethane industrial partnerships has 6 working groups and is open to both member states as well as industrial actors as well as NGOs. To give you some examples, so one of the working groups under the biomethane industrial partnerships is really with member states, and there we are developing with the member states, by member states, a technical potential for those member states to increase kind of their ambitions in their national energy and climate plans. We also have a working group which works on these innovation topics that I mentioned before, very specifically. We're also having a working group which looks at the economic opportunities that derive not only from the production of biogas, but also, for example, on the economic opportunities that are available for the use of substrates. So substrates are the leftovers if you upgrade your biomass resource into biogas, and they can have important economic benefits, for example, as natural fertilizers. So that's another working group that we're working on under the biomethane industrial partnership. Another working group, which is very relevant, is that we're actually working with Ukrainian partners today. As you know, Ukraine, until today, is still kind of a transit country from Russian gas from Russia to Europe. At the same time, Ukraine has a big potential for the production of biogas as well as biomethane. So one of the working groups that we have under this biomethane industrial partnerships is to work together both with EU partners and within Ukraine to see how we can upscale there as well the production of biomethane and have that come in as a sustainable source for the European economy. So this partnership is open. The website is on the top of there. It only requires you to click get involved. So I think certainly that's one of the things that I want to give away with this presentation, to kind of try this and see if you're not already involved, to get involved in one of those working groups. From our side, for example, it's not only my colleagues that are working in the Director General for Energy. that are involved in these working groups, but also our colleagues that are supporting research and innovation are involved. Our colleagues that are working on transport policies are involved in this biomethane industrial partnership. That's certainly something that if you're looking at opportunities within the EU, you should follow. So this was a bit my presentation from my side on our strategies. So I think I've got a colleague there with a microphone. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand, state who you are and where you're from, and I'll try to answer your questions. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions are still available here on the stage if you have them. Thank you.